White store manager slaps black kid speechless when her mom arrives, and she's the CEO IT was. Just another afternoon when 12-year-old Jordan stepped into the local convenience store, holding a dollar bill he had carefully saved. All he wanted was a simple candy bar before heading home. His footsteps echoed softly on the tiled floor, but the moment the store manager, Richard, saw him, suspicion filled the man's eyes. Richard had a reputation in town for being short-tempered, but today his behavior would cross a line that no one expected. He glared at the boy and barked, "What are you doing here?" Startled, Jordan held up his dollar and explained politely that he was there to buy candy. But Richard's face twisted with anger. He accused the child of stealing and demanded he empty his pockets. Trembling, Jordan turned them inside out, showing nothing but the money he had brought, yet instead of apologizing, Richard's fury only grew. He called the boy a liar and, in front of shocked customers, struck him across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the store. Jordan stumbled, his eyes wide and filling with tears. Before he could recover, Richard grabbed his arm roughly and announced that he was calling the police. The store went silent. Customers frozen, some whispering, others pretending not to see. Jordan pleaded, his voice breaking, insisting he hadn't stolen anything. But Richard dragged him toward the back office, determined to punish him for a crime he hadn't committed. Just then, the front door opened, and a tall woman in a navy blue suit walked in, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She froze when she saw the red mark on her son's cheek. "Jordan?" she said, her voice trembling with controlled rage. The boy broke free and ran into her arms, sobbing. The woman straightened, turning to Richard with eyes like steel. "What did you just do to my son?" she demanded. Richard scoffed and claimed Jordan was stealing, insisting he had every right to discipline him. But the woman didn't back down. She looked at her child, then back at the man, her voice cutting through the silence. "You hit a child with no proof? Do you even know who I am?" Richard smirked arrogantly, brushing her off until she pulled a sleek card from her purse. "My name is Angela Carter," she said firmly. "I am the CEO of the corporation that owns this chain of stores." The entire room gasped. Customers who had stayed silent began speaking up, defending Jordan, saying they had seen his money. Richard's face drained of color, stuttered, tried to backpedal, but it was too late. Angela's voice grew stronger with every word. She reminded him of the values her company was built upon and declared that his behavior was unacceptable. Right there, in front of everyone, she fired him on the spot. 2 corporate security officers arrived minutes later and escorted the disgraced manager out. Angela turned to the crowd and apologized for what they had witnessed, assuring them this would never happen again. Then she knelt by her son and told him never to forget that no one had the right to treat him as less than he was. As they walked out together, heads held high, the story of that day began to spread through town. A reminder that justice has a way of arriving, sometimes in the most unexpected way. Asterisk. The store went silent as the tall woman in the navy blue suit stepped forward, her eyes locking on the red mark across her son's cheek. She pulled Jordan close, her protective arm around him as she raised her gaze to the manager. Her voice was low but sharp, the kind of tone that could freeze a room. "What did you just do to my son?" Richard, puffing his chest in arrogance, gave a mocking smirk and pointed his finger. "Your son? He was stealing. I caught him red-handed," he said confidently, as if the crowd would side with him. The woman's jaw tightened, her composure trembling under the surface. "You hit a child? Without proof?" she asked, her voice trembling, only with controlled anger. Richard snapped back with no hesitation. "I don't need proof. I know a thief when I see one." Gasps rippled through the customers who had gathered nearby, their whispers swelling as they realized the seriousness of the accusation. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others exchanged glances, but no one dared to challenge the man directly. Jordan, still trembling, tugged gently at his mother's sleeve, his small voice breaking through the tension. "Mom, I didn't do anything. I just wanted candy. I even had my money." His little hand pointed toward the crumpled dollar bill still lying on the floor where it had fallen when Richard had slapped it from his grasp. The mother's eyes moved to the bill on the tiles, her lips pressing into a thin line, then slowly returned to Richard with a stare that could cut glass. "You accused my son without cause, humiliated him in front of strangers, and you laid your hands on him?" she demanded. Richard scoffed dismissively, waving his hand as if brushing her words away. "Lady, don't get dramatic. I run this store. I make the rules. If you don't like it, take your kid and leave before I call the police myself." The wrongness of his words hung heavy in the air, and the silence from the onlookers deepened, everyone waiting to see what the woman would do next. She straightened her shoulders, her heels clicking once as she took a single, deliberate step forward, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a calm but unshakable power. "Do you know who I am?" Richie rolled his eyes, folding his arms with an air of defiance. "No, and I don't care. Just another angry parent trying to protect their spoiled brat." That arrogance was the last shield he had, and it was about to shatter. Customers leaned in, sensing the shift. Without breaking eye contact, the woman reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek business card. Holding it up between two fingers, she spoke with firm clarity, each word deliberate. "My name is Angela Carter," she declared, her voice echoing through the stunned silence, "and I am the chief executive officer of the very corporation that owns this chain of stores." A wave of shock tore through the room. Customers gasped loudly, some covering their mouths in disbelief, others whispering in urgent tones. All eyes turned toward Richard, whose smug expression collapsed in an instant. The color drained from his face as the weight of her words sank in, and for the first time that day, the arrogant store manager was utterly speechless. Richard's smirk dissolved as the words sank in, his body stumbling a half-step backward as though the ground had shifted beneath him. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first, his confidence draining with every heartbeat. You're the CEO," he finally stammered, his voice cracking in disbelief. The crowd that had been whispering moments earlier fell into complete silence, all eyes bouncing between the trembling manager and the composed woman who stood like a pillar of authority. Angela Carter's gaze did not waver. Her eyes were fixed on him with the sharpness of a hawk closing in on its prey. "Yes," she said coldly, her words cutting through the heavy air. "And I just witnessed my own manager lay hands on a child based on nothing but your prejudice." The silence broke as a murmur swept across the store, the customers suddenly finding the courage that fear had stolen from them earlier. One woman, who had been near the entrance the entire time, stepped forward and raised her voice. "She's right. That boy didn't steal a thing. I saw him walk in holding his money." Another man, standing by the frozen section, chimed in, shaking his head with disgust. "You went too far, Richard. Way too far. We all saw it. The tide had shifted completely." The people who once stayed quiet now spoke with conviction there, voices rising in agreement. Angela lowered her eyes to Jordan, placing her steady hands on his shoulders, grounding him in the middle of the chaos. Voice softened just for him. "You are a brave young man," she said gently, her tone carrying warmth and reassurance that made his trembling begin to ease. Then she lifted her head again, her focus snapping back to Richard with the force of a storm. Her entire demeanor shifted from nurturing mother to unshakable leader. "You, on the other hand," she declared, her voice loud and clear, "are finished." Richard's face was now drenched in sweat, his arrogance replaced by panic. He stumbled over his words, trying to grasp at excuses. "People, Ms. Carter, it was a misunderstanding. I was just—" But Angela cut him off before he could finish. Her voice struck like a hammer against stone. "Just what? Just abusing your position? Just humiliating a child because of the color of his skin? Just striking someone else's child as if you had the right?" The force of her words seemed to shake the walls, every syllable laced with righteous fury. The entire store stood frozen, the customers holding their breath, caught in the gravity of the confrontation. Angela's voice dropped lower, but became even more powerful, each word deliberate, echoing with the weight of finality. "I built this company on respect, on equality, and on community. And you," she pointed directly at Richard, who flinched under her gaze, "you have disgraced it all in a single moment. Effective immediately, you were terminated." A collective gasp swept the store, customers whispering in shock, some even smiling with satisfaction. The mighty manager, who had ruled with arrogance moments before, now stood exposed. Powerless and broken, his downfall witnessed by everyone around him. Richard's knees nearly gave out beneath him, his once commanding posture now reduced to a desperate, trembling stance. His voice cracked as he tried to hold on to what little dignity he thought he had left. "You can't do that," he stammered, his hands raised slightly in protest. "I've worked here for years. I've given my life to this store." But Angela Carter did not so much as flinch. Her face was calm, steady, and carved with the kind of authority that could not be challenged. She took one step closer, her voice cutting through the thick silence that filled the store. "Exactly, Richard. You've been here for years. And in those years, how many children did you accuse without proof? How many parents walked away humiliated? How many customers did you chase off with your arrogance and cruelty? Tell me how. Many other families suffered at your hands." Her words struck him harder than any slap, his lips trembling as he searched for an answer, but there was none. The truth was written in the averted eyes of the customers around him. In the uncomfortable shifting of their feet, in the guilt that spread across his own face. Angela shook her head slowly, her voice firm and final. "It ends today. Right now." She pulled out her phone with practiced precision, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. The crowd of onlookers leaned in, their curiosity mingling with awe as they realized she wasn't making idle threats. Within minutes, the sound of heavy footsteps entered the store. 2 corporate security officers in dark uniforms strode in, their presence authoritative, their eyes immediately finding Richard. The crowd parted like water around them as they approached the stunned manager. Richard raised his hands, his voice breaking into pleas. "Wait, no, please, let me explain this. It's all a misunderstanding. I didn't mean," but his words fell flat, drowned out by the whispers that rippled through the room like wildfire. "That's him," someone muttered. "That's the man who hit the boy." Another voice added, "He's finally getting what he deserves." The officers flanked Richard, each grabbing an arm, and with no ceremony, they escorted him toward the door. His protests grew weaker, swallowed by the eyes and judgment of the people he had once lorded over. By the time the door slammed shut behind him, Richard was no longer the powerful manager. He was nothing more than a disgraced man stripped of his pride. Angela turned then, her sharp expression softening as she faced the customers. She straightened her jacket and lifted her chin, her voice carrying the weight of sincerity. "I want to personally apologize for what you just witnessed," she said firmly. "This is not who we are as a company, and this is not who we will ever be. This kind of behavior will never be tolerated again." For a moment, silence hung over the crowd, and then, slowly, people began to clap. The applause grew louder, filling the store, until it became a wave of cheers, whistles, and nods of approval. Strangers who had once stood frozen in fear were now united in admiration. Jordan tilted his head up toward his mother, his young eyes wide with awe. "Mom," he whispered, his voice a mix of surprise and relief, "you fired him? Just like that?" Angela's eyes softened as she bent down, cupping his face gently in her hands. "Listen to me, Jordan," she said, her tone warm but unwavering. No one ever has the right to put their hands on you or treat you as less than you are. Don't you ever forget that." A faint but brave smile spread across his lips as he nodded, the fear that had once gripped him slowly melting away. For the first time since that terrible moment, he felt safe, protected, proud. As they walked out of the store together, mother and son side by side, the crowd's whispers followed them. Whispers not of pity, but of respect and admiration. News of what had happened would spread through the town like wildfire, a story people would tell for years, a story of justice, of courage, and of a mother who stood taller than prejudice itself. And Richard would never forget the day. His arrogance and bias cost him everything. The day he learned the hard way that sometimes the person you choose to demean turns out to be the very one who holds your future in their hands.